Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching WION Climate Tracker with me, Molly Gambhir. In the 21st century, our world is far more connected and interdependent than you would think. Trade routes, energy lines, even food supply chains, they're all crisscrossing across the world. You don't realize this until it is disrupted. And that is exactly what the Russia-Ukraine war has done. The raging war that has today entered 6 months has interrupted almost all sense of normalcy in the world order. Countries are in a split, choosing sides that benefit them. But climate experts are far from choosing their foes and friends. For many decades, climate change has been on the back burner. And just when governments around the world started noticing the glaring effects, Russia started its quote-unquote special military operations in Ukraine. And shifting the focus climate change was receiving. When we asked experts, we found out that the issue is twofold. One, that the war has overshadowed the fight against climate change. And two, it is making countries backtrack on the little achievements made towards a cleaner planet. You see, Russia is among the biggest fuel suppliers in the world. And with the West sanctioning anything even remotely related to the Kremlin, the energy sector is staring at an uncertain future. Experts were hopeful that this will prompt the world to shift to renewable energy sooner, but to their disappointment, the opposite has happened. To meet the demands at home, the US and European countries marched in the opposite direction. Lights at old coal mines are glowing again, which is cheaper and not monopolized by Russia. But its combustion emits significantly more greenhouse gases, and this comes just a few months after tall promises at the Glasgow COP26 summit. Countries that had been pushing for the coal phase-out proposal are turning their backs on it. Germany, Austria and the Netherlands lifted restrictions on the fossil fuel power plants and also extended the lives of dozens of coal plants that were scheduled to close by 2030. France is also actively considering restarting its St. Avold coal-fired power plant. Remember, this plant was shut this March, and this is having a ripple effect on non-EU countries as well, like Australia and Indonesia. These are major coal-producing countries that are about to reach their export peaks. The United States, on the other hand, is relatively energy independent. Even though the country has banned oil, gas and coal imports from Russia, it has had a very minimal effect on the demands. But this does not mean that the US is faithful to its promises. In 2021, President Joe Biden pledged to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions over the next decade and also send long-promised climate funds to help developing countries. None are on track. The war in Ukraine put all these international commitments on hold. Since the outbreak of the war, the US has provided approximately $9.1 billion in security assistance to Ukraine. Somehow, this had to be squeezed out from the climate finance. The UN Secretary General had also warned about this within months of the war.
Obviously, when we have a dramatic situation with the dimension of this war that has no comparison with any other conflict in the last decades, there is inevitably a diversion of attention in relation to many other issues. And the sense of urgency in the debate on climate has, of course, suffered with the war in Ukraine.
This is not the first time that geopolitics has taken precedence over action against climate change. Since the Industrial Revolution, climate experts have been warning about the implications of a warmer planet. But as it means filling the pockets of the rich, there have almost always been issues more important than something so life-threatening as climate change. And joining us live from Warsaw is Wojciech Jakubik, energy analyst at Business Alert. Thanks very much for being here on the broadcast. If you can help us understand better the impact that the Russia-Ukraine war has had when it comes to the fight against climate change, not like the countries that have been making these climate pledges were sticking to them, but the war has definitely once again put the fight against climate change on the back burner, unfortunately.
Okay, so Russia is making Europe using whatever power plant it has. So it is using also the coal power plants especially the Western Europe, which is heavily dependent on natural gas because it was a so-called transition fuel. You cannot go 100% renewables today, so you go through transition, which was fueled by natural gas. And this natural gas in 40% was coming from Russia. So Russian Gazprom is limiting gas supplies since holidays 2021. And that is why we have an enormous gas price. It is like almost 300 euro per megawatt right now. It is even higher than at the beginning of Russian invasion on Ukraine. And that is making us Europeans use whatever we can. Poland is dependent on coal in 70%. This amount will only increase because coal is what we have. And in the short term, of course, we have this emergency policy that is impairing climate policy. But in longer run, quitting fossil fuels is a part of solution. It is making us less dependent on Russia, but on any fossil fuel in the end. And in the end, with the technological development, also with nuclear energy in place, we could quit fossil fuels and reach the climate goals.
Right. When it comes to these climate pledges that have been made by the countries we've been talking about, what do you make of these commitments that look very good on paper, but will see a lot more efforts, which the war, of course, has dampened for now?
So we'll see heavier emissions from Germany, Netherlands, from countries which were to decrease their emissions significantly. But one of the reasons is also because Germans are quitting nuclear power. If they would go nuclear, they wouldn't rely on natural gas so much, and they wouldn't need to recover the coal generation today. But we cannot overcome these obstacles like in a week or in a month. You need to invest in years of energy transition, and that's when we'll see some results. But in 20s, depending on the size, the scope, the length of energy crunch in Europe, we'll see heavier CO2 emissions, and climate policy is lost because of what Vladimir Putin is doing in Ukraine.
Indeed. We are leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us on the broadcast.
Thank you.
Moving on for now, with water levels at record low in some areas, never seen before, riverbeds are up for exploration. While this is a worrying trend for climate activists, not so much for archaeologists. The drought in Texas has dried up a river that flows right through a dinosaur valley park. With close to no water, tracks from around 113 million years old have been discovered. Dinosaurs that roamed our planet centuries ago have always fascinated experts and the public alike. Photographs showing three-toed footprints leading down a dry riverbed. The state park was once on the edge of an ancient ocean, and dinosaurs are said to have left footprints in the mud. And we have a similar story coming in from Spain. Weeks of rising temperatures and very less rainfall draining the water levels in some of Europe's biggest lakes and rivers. In one of the reservoirs, the level fell so low that it exposed the rarely visible dolmen of Guadalpeler. It is dubbed as the Spanish Stonehenge and dates back to 5000 BC. Since 1963, it has been visible fully only 4 times. Even in Germany, the drought unmasked the so-called hunger stones, which are seen as a landmark for famine victims back in the 15th century, and hence the emergence has not been welcomed like in Spain. The structures remind the Germans of the hardships that people faced during the former droughts. Europe's worst drought in years has pushed the mighty river to one of its lowest levels in almost a century, and this has exposed dozens of explosive-laden German warships. They are from the times of World War II, and the vessels were among hundreds scuttled along the river by Nazi Germany in 1944. And staying with the story of the drying up rivers, Europe's second longest river has now reached one of its lowest levels in the last century. And this is due to the severe drought across the continent. The Danube stretches from the Black Forest in southwestern Germany to the Black Sea in eastern Romania. And because of the extreme heat, water levels recently fell 5 feet in 3 weeks' time at a stretch near Budapest. Low water levels have created a hazard for local river transport and fishing on the river. Water levels are so low that ships need to wait anchored upstream and downstream from the port and then travel one at a time through the last available fairway.
I have never seen the Danube level so low like this year. It's very low. I was a kid and it was low, but not like this. The drought is so severe even in Europe and in the US, it is bad. Drought due to lots of heat and no rain at all.
Further north, the Romanian capital is also surrounded by dried out fields. The area's leading water company has warned that the sudden drop could threaten its supply of drinking water. The extreme temperatures have also led to lower harvests and burdened Europe's ability to create its own energy supplies. There has been a major reduction in hydropower. The scorching weather has caused alarm across the continent. As heat waves have increased at a faster rate, scientists are pointing towards global warming playing a major role in changing the weather patterns. In the south of Spain, rising sea levels are threatening to engulf land, washing away homes and livelihoods. The coastline around the Ebro Delta region in the southwest of the province of Tarragona in Catalonia in Spain is receding around 5 meters every year. The locals say little is being done to save the region. Our next report, getting you the complete story. Take a look.
In the south of Spain, rising sea levels are threatening to engulf land, washing away homes and livelihoods. The coastline around the Ebro Delta region in the southwest of the province of Tarragona in Catalonia in Spain is receding around 5 meters every year. Locals say very little is being done to save the region. At first glance, the Ebro Delta appears to be a coastal paradise. The delta boasts of salt marshes, dunes, beaches, riverside woodlands and coastal lagoons. It is home to a variety of fauna including birds, reptiles, fish and amphibians protected by a natural park status. However, decades of bad water management and sea level rise due to climate change could mean that the Ebro Delta could soon be underwater. And southern Europe could lose one of its most important and unique natural areas. Every summer, thousands of tourists come to enjoy the beauty of the Ebro Wildlife Park. Visitors enjoy jet skiing, wildlife walks and bird watching.
I feel sad because the beauty of nature is under threat and so many people have their lives and economy pegged to this area. This is my first time at the Ebro Delta and I love it. I hope I'll be able to come back with my children before all of this disappears.
Before it flows into the Mediterranean, the Ebro River's course is interrupted by 70 dams. And because of this, over 90% of the sediment which would otherwise fertilize the rice fields and feed the shellfish offshore, it is now captured upstream and never reaches the sea. As a result, the delta is gradually sinking off the ground because of underground material movement. It is a phenomenon known as subsidence. Without the dams, the Ebro River would be able to cope with the rising sea levels. But the current situation is also threatening thousands of businesses and economic activities, including agriculture, fishing and tourism that are heavily dependent on the river.
We are in a flatland at sea level, and we suffer the consequence of the inaction of different administrations, because in other EU countries they are taking action, like in the Netherlands since decades ago. But over here they've done nothing. And that has resulted in the sea invading our home. We have areas where the sea has already entered the delta. And this isn't about making estimations of how many years it will take to get worse. The problem is here, and we must act now.
And action being taken by the government are intended to minimize the damage. In January 2020, the winter storm Gloria put the Ebro Delta in the spotlight. The most famous photo of the damage brought by the storm Gloria to the Delta was that of a restaurant at Marquesa Beach, which was left almost completely surrounded by water.
We used to stand 800 meters from the sea, and now the sea is just outside our door because they did nothing. But I'm not the only one affected. It's the whole municipality. The delta regression affects us all, not just me.
The days of many such businesses are numbered. According to Catalonia's Polytechnic University, the Delta is currently experiencing what most beaches around the world will suffer by 2050 or 2070. In 2021, the European Union presented its Rest Coast project. The project aims to work on 12 coastal points, which need urgent action to tackle climate change. 3 priority sites have been highlighted. That is, Venice's lagoon, the Wadden Sea in the North Sea and the Ebro Delta. How successful will this project be? That only time will tell. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
In Iraq, the drought has hit hard. The flow of the Euphrates has dropped visibly in the recent months, while scorching temperatures sometimes reach 50 degrees Celsius. Iraqis fill water from tank trucks in the Al-Agawat village amid a lack of potable tap water.
اقول لك الماء احنا نسترشده نقلله عندنا طرق نقلله بس يا اخي شو تقلله هو ذا الجو حار انا يعني شلون ما اقلله والله ما اسبح اقلله والله ما اغسل دشداشتي اقلله ما يسبح طفلي ما يصير عمي والله ما يصير ولا حيوان ما يورد يعني يوم وثاني يوم يموت فماكو ترشيد عندنا برينا مالحه نخبط هذا الماء المالح وياه الحلو وهذا غيره ماكو.
In Saudi Arabia as well, temperatures have gone up to 50 degrees Celsius. Some are escaping to the city of Fog, which is a mountainous oasis of cool where warm clothing is needed even in the summer season. The retreat is 2,800 meters above sea level in Saudi Arabia's rugged south. It is in stark contrast to other parts of the vast, largely desert country where summer heat is an annual challenge.
هذا من الأجواء الحارة والشمس الحارقة عندنا درجة الحرارة تصل ل 47 46 والآن 20 22 18 في الليل أجواء باردة وجو خلاب أماكن مرتفعة أمطار شبه مستمرة الضباب يعني.
Since 2018, Najin and Fatu have been the only northern white rhinos left in the world. Southern white rhinos as well as black rhinos are prime prey for poachers. On the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List of Threatened Species, southern white rhinos are listed as near threatened, while black rhinos are critically endangered. However, a new report released by the IUCN suggests that rhino poaching rates have been on the decline since 2018. Our next report telling you more. Take a look.
Since 2018, Najin and Fatu have been the only northern white rhinos left in the world. Northern white rhinos, as well as black rhinos, are prime prey for poachers on the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List of Threatened Species. Southern white rhinos are listed as near threatened, while black rhinos are critically endangered. However, a new report released by the IUCN suggests that rhino poaching rates have been on the decline since 2018. The good news first. There is a decline in the number of rhinos being killed. The bad news, yet the illegal trade remains an acute threat to the survival of these iconic animals. The dramatic reduction of the white rhino species has been due to decades of rampant poaching. Their horns have long been used as carving material and prized in traditional Chinese medicine for their supposed healing properties. At least 2,707 rhinos were poached across Africa between 2018 and 2021. However, efforts have long been in place to ensure their survival. These efforts now seem to be paying off. Poaching rates in Africa have continued to decline, from a peak of 5.3% in 2018 to 2.3% in 2021.
Historically, for instance, East Africa, particularly places like Kenya and Tanzania, suffered from appalling poaching, figures, but they, and in Kenya in particular, has managed to turn that around very, very significantly with a concerted investment from government as well as NGOs like ourselves, and really putting a lot of money and effort into building up the anti-poaching teams and training them and equipping them, and so on and so forth. Whereas South Africa, historically, whilst East Africa was suffering from this sort of poaching crisis, South Africa was, didn't have any poaching. In fact, they would often say, "Oh, that would never happen down here." And I think that in some respects, there was a complacency in South Africa in the 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and they are now, paying the price for that.
Efforts to conserve rhinos have included IVF treatments and more drastic steps, such as dehorning, so that they're less attractive to poachers. The COVID pandemic is also one of the reasons for the drop in poaching. With lockdowns and restrictions imposed on several African countries, poaching rates fell dramatically compared to previous years. However, activists are not convinced that the South African government is really tackling the problem.
Corruption in South Africa, particularly under the previous government, was rife, so that certainly, aided the rapid rise in rhino poaching that we saw. I think at its height in something like 2015 or something like that. I can't remember the exact dates now, but where there was in one year they had over 1,100 rhino poached.
Extensive national parks are also a problem for South Africa. There are huge rhino numbers in the Kruger National Park, which shares a large land border with Mozambique, which is very difficult to patrol. That allows poaching gangs led by international criminal syndicates to flourish. However, where South Africa has fallen short, other countries have taken a more dynamic approach. India and Nepal put effective prevention measures in place, and in the past decade have seen significant reductions.
In past few years, poaching has been declined. I think Nepal only one poaching recorded, whereas in India it is about 10 in the span of last 3 to 4 years time, which is much lower compared to the earlier, the years. And this has been, possible because of the proactive steps both the Indian government and Nepal government has initiated.
Despite these efforts, rhinos are still threatened. If rhino species have to be conserved, countries like South Africa will have to find new ways of saving them.
On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of WION Climate Tracker. We are taking a break at this point. Stay tuned to WION World is One. Thanks very much for watching.